अभी आपको इस्लामाबाद बराह रास्त लिए चलते हैं, जहां पर कश्मीर लीगल फोरम की न्यूज कॉन्फ्रेंस जारी है।
मुश्किल है ये हरबे इसको इसको पेपर वर्क लॉफेयर अब इंडिया कर रही है कश्मीर में। आसन अंतु का टॉर्चर केस ऑलरेडी हमने यूजे स्टोक वाइट को दिया था एंड आसन हिमसेल्फ सबमिटेड हिज टेस्टिमनी। जिससे पहले आसन अंतु को गिरफ्तार किया जाता, उसने अपनी टेस्टिमनी सबमिट की थी स्टोक वाइट को, और उसकी टेस्टिमनी ओपन नहीं हो सकती अभी। लेकिन मैं कुछ चीजें आसन के बारे में आपसे जिक्र करूं। आसन का केस इज अगेन यूनिक केस फॉर द टॉर्चर। आसन वाज ब्रूटली टॉर्चर्ड मल्टीपल टाइम्स। One, Asan was even sodomized inside the jail. He has given the testimony. Asan को प्राइवेट पार्ट में एक आयरन रॉड लगाई थी, जिसकी वजह से ही वॉज ब्रूटली इंजर्ड। एंड देन इन 2019, आप प्लीज ये देखें, दिस इज द असन्स लेटेस्ट टॉर्चर इन 2021, जब ये 5th of August का ऑपरेशन ने किया। देन लेटर आसन वॉज डिटेन्ड एंड आसन वॉज अगेन टॉर्चर्ड फॉर merely doing defending the human rights. हमने आसन उनको के नुमाइंदे, because आसन is chairman of human rights organization, उनके नुमाइंदी यहाँ पर मुश्ताकुल इस्लाम साहब को भी हमने बुलाया है। This is all अभी जो हम इन हवाले से बात करेंगे। और हमारे साथ lately would be joining by the Stoke White head, Mr. Hakan Kamus, who is a partner. उनसे भी गुफ्तगू राउंड टेबल में करेंगे। जिससे पहले और कुछ मैं दावत देता हूं अपने उस्ताद मोहतरम को। ही विल ब्रीफ यू अबाउट द टेक्निकलिटीज ऑफ दीज लॉज, कैसे ये इन्वोक किया और कितने देर से हम इस कोशिश में थे कि हम जो कश्मीर है विच इज कैटेगराइज्ड एज इंटरनेशनल आर्म्ड कॉन्फ्लिक्ट एंड व्हाटएवर हैपेंस देयर इज वॉर crime against humanity, this crime of aggression. Please, Dr. Saab.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Nasir Qadri Saab, for inviting me to talk on this very important issue. For me, this is a historic moment because I am Dr. Mohammad Mushtaq Ahmed, former Director General of the Sharia Academy, International Islamic University, Islamabad. I also chaired the Department of Law in the same university, and I also do consultancy with the International Committee of the Red Cross for the last more than 10 years for dissemination of the law of armed conflict or international humanitarian law. I have the honor of, Alhamdulillah, supervising 3 PhD law dissertations on Kashmir issue. Perhaps the only person in Pakistan today to claim this honor of supervising 3 PhD law dissertations on Kashmir issue. I have been writing on the right of self-determination and other aspects of the Kashmir dispute and human rights law and humanitarian law for quite some time. For me, as I said, this is a historic moment because I have been teaching this for more than 15 years now, that for me the Kashmir dispute, the nature of the Kashmir dispute is quite different from what is generally portrayed on media, including Pakistani media, unfortunately. I have been asserting that this is a case of prolonged occupation. And there are a few very simple points. First of all, Kashmir, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was occupied by Indian armed forces. There may be quite interesting details, but because of shortage of time I won't go into those details. About accession deed which Maharaja signed with India, there are several serious legal questions about the validity or authenticity of that accession deed, and whether it was when Maharaja was signing it, whether he had control over the state or not, and whether he had the legal authority to sign it or not. And when India went to UN Security Council and accepted the resolutions there for plebiscite, then accession deed became redundant even for India. And even later, when they held elections in Indian occupied part of Kashmir and then passed a resolution, even then the UN Security Council took cognizance of the issue when Pakistan went there in 1957 and passed another resolution declaring that the status of this territory has not changed. And even in 1972, when Shimla Accord was signed, even at that time, when we were under, of course, duress and pressure, there are provisions which kept intact our position on this issue. So this is my first point, that the state of Jammu and Kashmir is an occupied territory, part of which has been liberated by the people of Kashmir with the help of Pakistan. Now, secondly, if this is occupation, then occupation and annexation have been declared illegal by international law since at least 1928, the Pact of Paris, which prohibited the use of, which prohibited war as an instrument of policy, and then in 1945, UN Charter, Article 2, Sub-Article 4, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of other states, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. And there are many other instruments such as the UN General Assembly resolution on principles of international law regarding friendly relations, such as resolution against a resolution on the definition of aggression 1974, and many other instruments are there, by virtue of which we hold this basic position that occupation and annexation have been declared illegal by international law. And to add further to this, from the perspective of international humanitarian law or the law of armed conflict, Geneva Conventions of 1949, they declare that occupation is an international armed conflict. It is not an internal issue of a state, it is an international armed conflict. Occupation, be it total or partial, and even if there is no single bullet fired, and even if there is no resistance against the occupation forces, still this will be international armed conflict, and the state of war shall continue. Now, interestingly, whenever you talk about prolonged occupation, mostly scholars talk about Palestinian issue, which of course is an issue of prolonged occupation, at least since 1967, when Israel occupied several territories, including Al-Quds. But Kashmir is even a more glaring example and a more disturbing example, because it has been occupied since 1947. But even the textbooks do not talk about Kashmir as an example of prolonged occupation, which is very disturbing fact. Now, the third point is that occupying forces cannot exercise the powers of a legitimate government in occupied territory. They, for example, cannot force the people of occupied territory to take oath of allegiance to the occupying power, and they cannot change demography of the occupied territory, which India has been doing.
इस्लामाबाद में कश्मीर लीगल फोरम की न्यूज़ कॉन्फ्रेंस जारी है।